What's up, guys? John Ross here with Ross Racing for another video. We're back after a long hiatus. The 2023 racing season is over, so we've got a lot of catching up to do. Now, I'd like to do a video that breaks down how our entire season went and gives you some details about what you can expect from the channel going into 2024, kind of our off-season plans and all that good stuff. But before I do that, I wanted to do this video that's going to give you guys some context. I know some of you may not be intimately familiar with how the structure and the point system works and all that for the series that I race in. So I wanted to do a little bit of an informational video that might help some of you guys understand that. So a little bit of a surface level recap of how the season went. I finished second in track points at Fairmont Raceway. I finished 38th in national points in the Summit USRA Weekly Racing Series. I believe I finished somewhere around 20th-ish. We'll look it up later in the northern region of that same series. So what we're going to do now is do a quick breakdown about what all that means. So as you can see from all the contingency decals across the bottom here, these are the contingency decals for the series that I race in. That first one right there, the Summit Weekly Racing Series for USRA. So a weekly racing series is different from what you might be familiar with of like a touring series, say something like NASCAR or something like, say, the World of Outlaws or USMTS in the dirt world. Those series, they visit a different track every week and you add up the points at the end of the year, sometimes with some added BS if you're NASCAR, and determine a champion. Well, weekly racing is a little bit different than that. In weekly racing, there's multiple tracks across the country that race under that sanctioning body. In this case, the sanctioning body is USRA, but say IMCA, WISSOTA, NASCAR even has a weekly racing series. They all do basically the same thing. And so you race at your local track, or you can travel around to different tracks, however you prefer to do it, and you score points each week. Usually it's the best X number of races that count towards the national points, and we'll get into that in detail in a little bit. But you can also win a track championship, which is the person who scores the most points at a given track in a year. So like I said, we finished second at Fairmont in track points there. Now, I think what we should do is we'll go inside and I'll fire up the computer and I'll show you guys a little bit in detail how the structure of the point system works. All right, so here we are in the Ross Racing Sim Cave, and what we're going to take a look at here first is the USRA point system. Now, as I mentioned, you have track points, regional points, and national points. Well, everything goes back to track points because that's what determines how many points you earn for each finishing position on each night of racing that you do. Now, for those of you who followed NASCAR from kind of like basically anywhere in the modern era up until about 10 years ago, you'll be familiar with maybe not the exact numbers because the numbers are different, but the idea behind this point system. So basically what you start out with is 100 points for the winner, then it drops by 5 down to 95 for second, drops by 4 down to 91 for third, by 4 again for fourth, then it drops by 3 until you get back to about 7th, and then it's dropping by 2, and then finally for the final few positions it's dropping by 1. So basically it's a little bit more weighted towards the top finishing positions, but also you're heavily rewarded for just showing up, because just to show up you're awarded 45 points, which is 45% of what you get for a win. Your track points, how you win a track championship, is just the cumulative total of all those points that you earn at that given track over the course of a year. Regional points are also based on track points, and there's no minimum or maximum number of nights counted. It's just all the nights that you score points in that region, whether that be the north, central, or south or southern regions. National points get a little bit more complicated. So for national points, it's also based off of the track points, but your point numbers are doubled. So you earn 200 national points for a win instead of 100. All the other numbers are just doubled all the way down the line. Now, when you get to the bonus points for national points is where things really start to make a difference. For every car that you pass in your feature, or every finishing position that you've advanced past your starting position, you earn a bonus point. There's also bonus points for car counts. Now, in the past, this was just a simple, say there's 20 cars, you get 20 bonus points, and the maximum
they changed it year to year, but usually the maximum was 20 points. They're changing that in this coming season to kind of a sliding scale where 10 points for 5 to 10 entries, 12 points for 11 to 15, so on and so forth. And also new for this year, winning a track championship nets you 10 bonus points. So that's kind of how the point system works for USRA. There's a lot of other different sanctioning bodies that have something similar but slightly different, but this is the point system that we race under. So now let's flip on over to this website called My Race Pass. And this isn't sponsored or anything. This is just a website that's a really handy resource to have for tracking points, tracking lap times, all kinds of cool stuff. I use it for a lot. But here we see the 2023 final points for USRA. As you can see, they've got the national points as well as those regional points I was talking about. Now, like I mentioned, I race in the northern region, so let's click on that first. One thing to note is that these points are separate class by class. Other sanctioning bodies like NASCAR, for example, have divisions where different classes of kind of similar characteristics are grouped together in divisions. But in USRA, each class scores points independently from all the other classes. So, taking a quick look at the northern region, looks like I ended up 23rd in the northern region. And as I mentioned, there's no maximum or minimum number of nights for regional points. So as you can see over in this column is the number of nights raced. I raced, or had 22 starts anyway, in the northern region over the course of the season. It's pretty much just stratified by how many starts you made. The guy that made the most starts won the championship, although it was close. And that's kind of how that tends to go. Winning a regional championship nets you some contingency prizes and stuff, but at least in USRA, it's generally not considered anywhere near as prestigious as winning the national championship. Now let's scroll over here to the national points. This is where things, as I mentioned, get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complicated. It's going to take a second to load here. So here we see the USRA national points for B-Mods. Now, like I mentioned with the regional points, it's a little bit different here and when you look at the number of features run versus where people ended up in the points. Obviously, guys with a lot of features run tend to average out towards the top, but that's not the only thing that determines where you end up, because in national points, only your 20 best nights over the course of the year count towards your national points total. So let's scroll down to where I'm at real quick. I wound up 38th in national points, and there you can see my final statistics of 1 win, 5 top 5s, and 19 top 10s in 30 starts. So what's cool about this, I guess I got to log in. Hold on a sec. So to get this detailed night-by-night points breakdown, you do have to have a subscription to My Race Pass. So again, not sponsored by them, or not trying to push a product or anything, but it is something that I find really useful over the course of the season. So this will show you all the nights that I had that counted towards my points and how those points were earned. For example, there's 168 points on this night for my feature position of 5th. I didn't get any bonus points for passing cars because I started the same spot that I finished, and I wound up with 11 bonus points for car count. This next night, I scored 162 points from finishing 6th, 18 for how many cars there were, and I gained 2 spots in the features, so that's plus 2 points. So that shows you all your nights that you scored points, and then in addition to that, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it shows you the nights that were not inside your top 20 best nights that were dropped that did not count towards your national points. So going back to the overall standings here, you can see that Joe Chisholm won the national championship over Shadron Turner, despite the fact that Joe only had 18 wins and Shad had 25. Remember, only the top 20 nights count, so that means that Shadron actually had more wins than there are even nights that count, and yet still managed to unfortunately lose out on the national championship. Now, the reason why that worked out that way is twofold. One, those car count bonus points make a big difference, and 2, where you start in the feature makes a big difference. Winning the race from the back row scores you a lot more points than winning the race from the front row. And, fun little fact here, so most of the tracks that Shadron races at, down around the KC area where I'm from originally, most of those tracks run a passing points format, which means that if you do really good in your heat race, you're going to start on the front row of the feature, and if you're fast like him and his team are, you're probably going to win. Now, most of the races up north where I'm racing at now race under a draw-redraw format, which means that if you do really good in your heat race, you make a redraw. And if you watch any of my videos from back during the season when we were racing, you'll see, me talking about that, like, oh, I won the heat race, but I redrew an 8 or whatever. So there's not necessarily that correlation between how fast you are in your heat race and where you start in your feature. That can play out to be an advantage for these guys in the northern region, like myself, or especially like Joe. He's on average going to start further back, which means if he's fast enough to win, he's going to pass those cars and he's going to score more points. Not to take anything away from Joe, because obviously, he won 18 races against some really tough competition up here. He's obviously fast and obviously a national champion. But there is a little bit of strategy that you got to think about in how you're going to, where you're going to race, when you're going to race. You want to go to a track that has a high car count, and if you want to score the most possible points, you actually want to start a little bit further back in the field if you know you're fast enough to win. Now, some guys will even sandbag and intentionally not do well in their heat race so that they can start further back and earn more national points. I don't know that there was any gamesmanship like that going on between these top guys, at least nothing that I saw. But I have seen that in the past, and you could say that the way that the points are structured, that's a legitimate strategy. So hopefully that gives you some idea of what it takes for a local or weekly racer to become a national champion in the USRA.
Well, there you have it, a basic summary of how the point system and structure works in the Summit USRA Weekly Racing Series. So I hope you all found that informative, found it helpful. Maybe even some of you that already knew a little bit of that stuff, maybe learned some new details about how it works. Like I said, in the next video, we're going to go into detail about how the 2023 season went, where I feel like our performance was good, where I feel like it could improve, and what we're going to do to the car over the offseason to try to improve that performance. So stick around, and we'll see you in the next video.